Satan interviewing. You know that's what they doing. Stick around. It's about to get all Ruby up in here. Remote Ruby starts now.
Yo, what's up, Andrew?
What's good in the hood?
You said Jason's off on PTO today. Lucky him.
I guess so, man. All I know is abandonment from Jason this year.
He's got 3 kids. I have 1 and can barely keep up.
He's got
with
4,
that,
bro,
so.
and he doesn't pay attention to his eldest.
Oh, man, that's good.
Absent father
Yeah,
from his eldest, bro. It's crazy.
I love it. I can only imagine how hectic of a year it's been and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So.
I'm sure he's already mentally done with work. I'm sure, as we all are. And then on top of that, kids are getting holiday break. I love his kids, but more than 2 days, and I don't think I would have been able to like pull myself out of bed.
It's tough. Yeah, lately Jackson, he's super clingy to Brooke, and then when we try to put him to bed, he like just wants to run around and roll around on the floor and do all kinds of stuff. The last thing he wants to do is get in bed. So it's pretty wild. But holidays make that even harder because you've got him at home way more than normal, and you've still got to work, or at least try to. But speaking of the holidays, Ruby 3.4.0 RC1 dropped today, which is pretty sweet.
Even see that.
Yeah. So I'm going to run through the post here real fast, but Prism is the new default parser. The modular GC alternative garbage collector implementations can be loaded dynamically through the modular garbage collector feature. That's sweet. Ruby's built-in garbage collector has been split into a separate file and interacts with Ruby using an API defined in GC implementation.h. Built-in garbage collector can now also be built as a library. That's cool. Enabled using the environment variable. An experimental GC library is provided based on MMTK. This GC library can be built. This requires the Rust toolchain on the build machine. Doesn't really describe too much, so I guess we'd have to do some digging into MMTK, Memory Management Toolkit. That's cool. Yeah, don't know much about that, but that sounds interesting. I really like the idea of being able to swap out different garbage collectors. If you really knew which was the best for your application, which Shopify might be a good example where they could optimize for a specific one, but also making it possible for you to like do the modular GCs makes it really helpful to go test various ones and whatever, because there's a whole bunch now of garbage collector implementations. So that's pretty sweet. I like that. Language changes.
Private garbage collectors. Just think about those private companies that come pick up your garbage when you pay them.
One of my friends worked on an app that would design routes for garbage trucks. But when we would talk about it, he'd be like, the garbage app. And I was like, yeah, your code's pretty garbage.
Yeah.
Teed up so many jokes. It was great.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Then he was working on his resume recently, and I was, you probably should, don't call it the garbage app on your resume.
Waste management app.
There you go. Yeah. What's interesting this go around is 3.4 only has 5 bullets for language changes, which is very minimal. So, and I think we've kind of felt that over the last few releases. Ruby 4 will be the one that major changes would happen in, but it makes it really easy to upgrade. I don't really remember anything that's been hard to upgrade of Ruby, except for when the keyword args thing changed. I made mistakes or whatever, just using the old style, and it went away or whatever. I don't even remember the details of it because it was kind of that easy to change. But
the double splatting the hash.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the things. All right, so these are string literals and files without a frozen string literal comment now behave as if they were frozen.
So I don't use the frozen string literal comments anymore because I use standard and it doesn't add them like Rubocop did it. So
yeah, I do think if they are mutated, a deprecation warning is emitted. So it's not a breaking change yet, but it will warn you about it. So yeah, that is good, but also helps us get in that direction for the frozen string literals that I assume that'll be 4. I would imagine that's a pretty major breaking change when it does raise errors or whatever. Because I bet you I do that all over the place and don't even really think about it.
I don't feel like
we'll
do.
Find out real fast.
We will find out. That's why I'm excited that they will have the deprecation, so we can definitely find out.
Yeah, that's going to be really helpful. Next one is the it keyword is added as a reference to reference a block parameter. So instead of doing like _1 or _2, that type of thing, you can say it, which I think will be nice. It will like make that more readable. I use _1 quite a bit just to not have to specify a variable name, and it will make that much more readable. So
you might as well just name it this.
Yeah, well, that gives me Vietnam flashbacks of JavaScript.
Exactly. I'm like, it's this _1, your block param.
I think it makes a lot more sense than _1, which is kind of.
But what if you want to pass when you read it for the first time? It too, or is it only one?
Yeah, it's the sequel.
Yeah,
the sequel. I assume that it's just the first one, which you would probably want to use the _1, 2, or named variables for that if you have more. So this is, I would assume, just for a single map or each or whatever, where you just have the one object on an array or something. Keyword splatting nil when calling methods is now supported. Double splat nil is treated similarly to double splat empty hash, passing no keywords and not calling any conversion methods. That's cool.
Okay. Yeah.
I like that. That makes that a little bit smoother, but nothing terribly major though. Block passing is no longer allowed in index. This is a bug of some sort. Oh, inside square brackets. Nothing big there. Keyword arguments are no longer allowed in index as well. So I guess that, and it's the same thing with the square brackets syntax or whatever on an object. So sure. All right.
Cool.
YJIT has a big section here. Better performance on most benchmarks on x86 64 and ARM 64 platforms, reduced memory usage of compilation metadata, multiple bug fixes. YJIT is now even more robust and better tested. Heck yeah. New features, unified memory limit with YJIT memory size command line option, which defaults to 128 megabytes. More statistics, now always available via YJIT runtime stats. Compilation log to track what gets compiled via YJIT log. That's cool. Add support for shareable constant multi-reactor mode. Now trace counted exits with YJIT trace exits counter. And there's a bunch of optimizations on core primitives like array each, select, and map, which was cool because I think there's a blog post the other day that was talking about this, I believe, that was array each, select, and map were rewritten in Ruby so that they would be faster than their C implementation, which makes your brain a little bit because you would just assume that the C version would be faster. But this allows YJIT to actually apply to those methods now, which is sweet. I thought that was really cool. We'll have to have a link to that. I think it was JP that wrote that post. I'll try and find it. But yeah, that was cool. I hadn't ever really considered that that would be faster to write Ruby's source code in Ruby itself to be faster, which is wild. Exception, set backtrace now accepts an array of thread backtrace location. Range size now raises type error if the range is not iterable. That was a fun one I ran into the other day. So when I was working on that Black Friday, Ruby, this is where I get to yell in anger, Ruby, but I'm talking about my dog, not programming things.
Oh, God. I bet that can lead to a lot of confusion in the house. This dog lives a very confused life.
Know, in general, we all assume it's the dog, usually. There are times. Speaking of range, though, something that people might not realize until they get into it, when you write range include some value, it actually iterates on every single value to check and see if it's in there. So that is good because the range might skip something maybe, but include is not what you want if you just want to check real quick, is this greater than or equal to the lowest value and less than or equal to the highest value? I believe that's right. People can correct me if I'm wrong, but you use cover for checking that instead, because what I ended up doing the other day was a range for our Black Friday sale that was a time to another time, but those are not iterable because what are you iterating on? Every millisecond, microsecond, second, hour, minute? How do you iterate between times? You can't unless you have some way to specify the value, and then you're going to make this massive range if it's microseconds or something. So in my little Black Friday gem, I made the range between these two times. And when I called include on there, this isn't iterable. What are you doing? Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about cover. Include is always the one that comes to mind. But cover is exactly what you want in that case, where it's basically, is it greater than or equal to the lower value or less than or equal to the upper value? And then we know that range covers that value. So I just forget that all the time. I don't do that too often in most of my code or whatever, but that was one that I ran into the other day that was, oh yeah, cover exists. And there's so many little methods like that that are in the standard library or in active support that forget all the stuff that exists.
I'm listening, but I'm very, very invested in what's going on behind you.
Yeah. I guarantee you it is a ladybug on the wall, and the dog is.
I was like, this dog is, there's something on this wall or in this vent, and this dog is on the case.
Yeah. No, I saw some ladybugs. Yep, definitely is one. They are everywhere.
Really?
So, yeah. Like a month or two ago, when they started showing up, they were just congregating 12 of them in a corner by our cabinets on our 10-foot ceiling, so we can't reach them. But somehow they get in, door open or something. Then they just like to hang out in little areas together. And now that it's getting cold, leaving. They're trying to find their way out of the house, which is not very easy.
Right.
When you found a crack to get in.
I understand. Your house is so huge, it's confusing. What else is in the release?
Compatibility issues. Error messages and backtrace displays have been changed. Use a single quote instead of a backtick as an opening quote. That's nice because I don't know how many times I've Googled that and had to remove the backticks or whatever. That's a better format, I think. I was actually surprised with the backtick, and then it wasn't two backticks, it was one and a single quote. I don't think I ever looked up why that was or whatever, but I think a nice improvement. I would assume that nobody's really depending on that. Maybe Honeybadger or some error monitoring things might, but I don't think so. I think they just get the array of backtrace things, lines or whatever. So that's interesting. Shouldn't be terribly breaking, but it is a compatibility thing. Display a class name before a method name only when the class has a permanent name. Interesting.
I don't know what that means.
String can't be coerced into integer.
Yeah, you should stop coercing your strings, people.
Byroot wrote this 2 years ago, and it's basically adding a string of 1 to an integer of 1 would give you a plus string can't be coerced into integer. And then now it will show you integer and the plus method before string can't be coerced into integer. When it's string or integer, are we calling strings plus method or integers plus method? I think it helps point out exactly which one is being called or whatever. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, nice.
It's funny how reasonably simple that is. And yet you look at the issue on rubylang.org and it's, I don't know, 50 comments or whatever, discussion back and forth. Every little change like this is not so little in reality. It's kind of wild. And last one in compatibility was kernel caller, thread, backtrace locations, methods are also changed accordingly. So they now include the class name and the method and single quotes instead of backticks. It's really the only thing then. Okay, cool. C API updates. I don't write C extensions.
Did Colonel Collar get promoted from Major? All right, I'm sorry.
I'm not even gonna.
That was for Jason. He's not here, but I did that for him. I'm gonna send him this specific line, and then we'll be good for this.
Yeah, just no context though. Passing a block to a method which doesn't use the pass block will show a warning on verbose mode. Redefining some core methods that are specially optimized by the interpreter in JIT. String.freeze or integer plus now emits a performance class warning. Nice to know that if you overrode that for whatever reason, which don't override those. That doesn't seem like a good idea. But I guess if you accidentally did, then we'll let you know. So another Jean Boussier contribution there. I talked to several people at RubyConf, and one of the things that I want to see here is, and because I've been working on the Getting Started guide, we have an install Ruby section now. For the longest time, that was the worst part, where every single week on Reddit you see that. So now maybe the thing we can get the Ruby team to do before 4, or hopefully well before that, but a version manager of Ruby with precompiled versions for Mac OS and Linux. Don't have to have Windows because nobody really uses Windows. And if you do, it's WSL. But precompiled Ruby. And I know it's hard because I think there's a lot of stuff built in that's, you could statically link OpenSSL, which is fine. You got to compile Ruby or whatever with, here's where the gems live and the built-in gems and whatever else. That stuff has to be given a specific folder. So I think there's maybe some changes that will happen in Ruby in order to support this. And Vinny is working on this, it sounds like. I think that would be the biggest improvement we could make in Ruby. So yeah, just need to keep saying that. So eventually somebody runs with it and figures out what needs to happen for it.
When you were talking about this, I was thinking in my brain, I'm like, dude, I've heard this so many times. I could recite this. But you're right. The more we say it, the more people are like, hey, when's that thing that they keep talking about coming out?
Yeah. It's fine. Docker kind of cheats and does that stuff for you or whatever because it's pre-built for you in the image that you inherit from. But for all the people who are just installing Ruby, a peasant like I do, that's what we need. That would be so awesome.
If you're a peasant, if you don't use Docker, then power to the people.
Exactly.
Yo, quick question for you. Do you want higher clarity into production but don't have the time to become a wizard in observability? Honeybadger Insights is exactly what you need. Forget the old school trio of logs, metrics, and traces. We're talking structured events that don't just sit there. They're your treasure map to solving mysteries in your app. With Honeybadger, sling your logs and events into the mix and voila, you just unlock the power of Honeybadger's new query language, BadgerQL. It's like having a conversation with your data. Ask it anything, turn mishaps into metrics, and showcase your wins on dashboards that even the marketing team will drool over. And guess what? This isn't just for big spenders. Honeybadger's got you covered with a free plan that packs a punch, including error tracking, uptime monitoring, sleek status pages, and more. Oh, and speaking of errors, Honeybadger treats them like VIPs at the club. With Insights and BadgerQL, your errors aren't just problems, they're opportunities. Explore your data in ways you didn't think were possible and get the insights that you deserve. Check out honeybadger.io. That's right, honeybadger.io.
Dude, as of yesterday afternoon, the Getting Started guide is now an Edge guide. I'm excited.
Congratulations.
Thanks. There's a lot of back and forth, but it really has come together and I think turned out really nice. Amanda helped make sure that I'd write things in there like class method and instance method and local variable and instance variable. And she was good about, so what does this mean? How should we explain this so it's even more beginner friendly? And I was, these are just things. This is just what it is. This is the term for it. And it was great to have that reminder of these are things you take for granted after doing this for 5, 10, 15 years, whatever. And trying to make the guide as accessible as possible without dumbing it down too much. I think we hit a good balance on it. And Jonathan made some killer diagrams for MVC, or even just explaining like you have a user makes an HTTP request, Rails does some things and kicks off a job, but then how does the job get run? And that's running out of band and whatever. So I could try my best to explain that in words, but a diagram really makes that understandable without having to just imagine stuff. So I'm very, very happy with how that turned out. We even got, it was a new feature in Red Carpet, the Markdown parser. That's what the Rails guides uses. And when I didn't know this about code blocks, I assumed that you just had the first word and that was the language and that's all it ever was intended to support. But apparently it's more or less freeform. So ideally the first word is the language and you could add other stuff to it. Red Carpet doesn't seem to return to the callback anything after the first word if you put a space after it. So I ended up doing a hash symbol and then lines that you can comment, which if you read the guides before, it'll be like, let's add the edit and update methods to the controller. And it just a paste of the whole controller because you really need to know where it belongs. They call it out in the paragraph above, but now we have line highlighting. So it's this line, this line, this line was added. And it makes it a lot easier to figure out what do I need to do as I'm following along as it gets more and more complex because you've got to insert an association in your model or stuff in your controller or go change the like before action at the very end. And it can be hard to notice some of those things. So that's been a tiny improvement, but a major one as a reader, which is awesome. So very, very excited to have that shipped, and it'll be backported to Rails 8. Right now it's in the 8.1, but that's because main in the Rails repo is already 8.1. So I think Raphael's backporting it to 8.0, and then we should have that this week, hopefully. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. I don't know. So,
and how long have you been working on this?
Months. I don't know exactly when, because I reached out to Amanda and asked if she had found anybody who's a technical writer for doing that guide. And I think she said she hadn't found anybody because you really needed to know Rails really well to kind of shape the right project that felt impressive, but also was just a great teaser for caching and jobs and the internationalization and all these other Rails features. So yeah, that was probably 9 months ago or more. I don't know. A long time ago. But
you made a baby.
We hadn't really went hardcore on it until a few months before Rails World. Rails 7.2 came out in the middle of this year or something. And it was kind of hard to tell what was going to change in Rails 8. We include for the very first time deploying your application in the guide, which is awesome because Kamal 2 is so good. It's so simple.
It's huge.
It's kind of amazing. You go build something and you get to see it live. I can't honestly believe how long it's been that Rails hasn't had that in the guides. So it's really been a good year for Rails because all these loose ends have started to be put together. You had to just go to Heroku, and I don't know the magic incantations to deploy Rails. I have to use Capistrano, I have to use Hatchbox, Heroku, someone else with the knowledge of the commands that need to be run to run it in production. And now it's 2 commands. It's Kamal setup and Kamal deploy, and that's about it. It's awesome. So this is a good sales pitch for Rails these days. You don't have to pay for a service. You can use your own server. You could use your Raspberry Pi at home. You could grab a Hetzner server, DigitalOcean, whatever's closest, cheapest, whatever you want. And that makes it really killer. I've been very, very happy with how it turned out. So we've been in review for a little while. First was the Rails core team and the Rails Foundation members, and then the public for like the last week or so, which has been good. So lots and lots of feedback on it. I just ended up reorganizing a whole section down lower for CSS. It's tricky because you write all this code and it has to be perfect because when you go modifying stuff, you can easily forget a variable or something in the code in a chunk way before or something. And then people get very confused. So it's very, very, very tedious to write a guide like this. One of those changes was John had made some CSS improvements to make it feel a little bit more like an e-commerce product on the product page. And that required adding some HTML on the views. But up until that point, we had just written plain HTML, no divs, no sections, no main tags, no nav tags, really, that sort of thing. And do we go back to the very first place where we create the show and then just add a section tag, but don't explain why? Just because we're going to need it later for CSS. So we ended up reorganizing that at the very end, where it's, all right, go back to the show page, add these sections that'll match with these CSS classes, and then add the design then. But that was one of the tricky things that writing these guides takes a long time to do to get right.
Well, I'm sure people will be very grateful that when it comes out, it'll be a nice brand new shiny guide. It won't be just how to build a basic article blog. So I'm excited.
It'll be awesome. There's a lot more coming as well. I'm going to add a link to at least the Edge guide in the notes here, and then the install Ruby on Rails guide that I added along with this, so that if anybody wants to follow those, they can. We ended up settling on Mise or Mise for the version manager because that's what is in Omakube. So it's already kind of the chosen one. But somebody pointed out that the Ruby website doesn't mention it yet. And there's all these other ones that people have used in the past and whatever. And it's, but the Ruby Lang site is the one that really needs a major update too. It just sucks to be like, oh, you want to use Ruby? Here's the source code. Go compile it yourself. Good luck. Ugh, not fun. So another one of those, hint, hint, let's go fix that. I don't know what needs to be done to pull it off. If anybody has ideas and wants to hit me up and see where I can help out, would love to know. I don't know C very well. I use Ruby, which is funny to think. If you want to work on Ruby, you don't get to really work on Ruby. You get to work in C.
And I've never written any language that started with the letter C. So I'm at a significant disadvantage.
When I went to Red Carpet source code for figuring out the line highlighting stuff, I was poking around trying to find the callback that it was using in the markdown renderer for the guides. And I start poking around and I'm like, there's not much code in here. This is weird. Where the hell is the markdown stuff? And then I see the extension folder. Oh no, it's the C extension. And I was just trying to read it, and it's creating a buffer variable and whatever else and reading things up until the last new line or whatever, and then returning the count, the length of that string and stuff. I could figure this out, but it would take me a long time just because I haven't written C since college or high school. And it's not that hard. It's just so much more tedious. And then trying to read through that at a high level and figure out where is it throwing away everything after the space in the language line. I could probably figure that out right away in Ruby, but trying to read that C source code and figure out what's happening, it's just way more tedious, and I just kind of gave up on it. This is way outside of the scope that I signed up for, updating this guide. I didn't sign up to go write C code.
Right. To update a markdown parser. So yeah. I would have noped out of that as well.
I would enjoy solving that problem, but the amount of time it would take me to do that when somebody who has a little bit of C knowledge could just go fix it. For some reason, the Rails guides are 4 minor versions behind, I think. They're on 3.2 instead of 3.6. And I don't think anything major is happening in the Markdown world. But I tried updating to the latest version and same thing. And I was, I don't know. We'll just leave it.
Yeah.
it could be refactored later if somebody does fix it, but that would require a new release of Red Carpet and then updating the guides and then updating the parser and stuff. So it'd be a little bit more coordination. And we were just originally trying to fix the guide, just rewrite that. Here I am, way off in the weeds, fighting these other dragons that I found along the
You're
way.
in Andrew's world, dude. This isn't my reality. How did I get here?
It totally felt like that because I recognized I've spent 30 minutes looking at this source code. How did I get here? What am I even doing?
That's what it's like having ADHD. You walk into the next room and you're like, wait, how did I get here? Why did I come here? I can exit the door behind me. The whole world has changed, dude. My whole mindset has changed. Goals have changed. Asks have changed.
Everything is, wait a minute. I don't even remember why.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. Good times. Anything new with you that you want to rant about? Did Black Friday and Cyber Monday go smoothly?
For the most part, yeah. For the most part, I think I've solved my Stripe problem, so I think that's good.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I have not yet refactored the Page M yet for the new client
I'm not
stuff.
even talking about that, so let's not even bring that up.
Maybe until they force me to change, because it still seems all backwards compatible. I haven't worried about it yet. But I did realize, this is a funny one. So I haven't fixed this yet the way that I wanted to. But the other day, I looked at the sell repo dashboard after Black Friday sales just to see if we had sold any licenses. And we had, but the number was way off. When I did the math of we sold this many licenses, but what it says in the dashboard is you've made X $1,000. That doesn't make any sense. And I start looking at it and I realize that when Stripe sends you a charge, it keeps the currency, it doesn't convert it, even though their dashboard will show you like you made whatever in US dollars. If you were using their currency conversion stuff, which you don't get with subscriptions, which is what everything of ours is. But sell repos are one-time sale purchase thing. So it was off by $17,000, it looked like. And I was, that's weird. Until I found that somebody paid in like Indian rupees or whatever. The currency exchange was 17,500. And I was, oh, yeah. So I started looking at it. We should probably sync the balance transactions. That's the associated object that actually keeps track of the currency conversion into your bank account. But I got thinking too, you can connect multiple bank accounts to Stripe. So you can have them converted into euros if you have a European bank account, or US dollars or Canadian dollars or British pounds, whatever. Even with the balance transaction, I can't just give you, here's your total sales ever, because we will have to use whatever's in the balance transaction there. And I was like, dang it. So I think I will maybe just change it to total number of sales or something. You can always go to your Stripe account if you want the exact numbers, but I also made it so that we could just group by and sum up the different currencies and just display all of them or whatever. Like everything, it's more complicated than it feels like it should be.
Something, dude. I keep going back in the history of my conversation with my project partner and copying the link in Slack and then resending to him. And all it says in all caps that I sent to him at 4 a.m. one morning is, it's always something, dude. And every time we have a new Stripe problem, I go resend that message to him and he laughs every time. Like, dude, it's always something.
It's so true. It's really the worst part about programming, that you always want that solution that's simple, but the real world is so freaking complicated that there is almost never a simple solution that works for everything. And it's always such a bummer when you hit one of those moments where you think you had it solved elegantly and simply, and then poof, all your hopes and dreams are gone. So that was definitely one of those moments for me this week. or last week. It was just so clean and so easy. You've made this much in sales. Ta-da! But now I think it'll be, you've made this much in US dollars, this much in euros, whatever it ends up being in your database. I'll have to do another release of Pay, but if we start syncing the balance transactions, then at least we could even filter that down to what ends up in your bank accounts. And usually you're probably going to only have one. Podia is a US company because Spencer's here, but you guys probably don't also, I don't know, paying Jamie is probably not paying him in US currency.
Paying
or whatever.
him?
Maybe. You're paying it, yeah. Theoretically, if you were to pay
volunteer CTO.
your CTO.
Yeah, theoretically.
I guess technically you could have a separate bank account overseas and European stuff with maybe better exchange rates or something, who knows? Or you don't have to exchange it at all, which is probably the ideal. Is if you have bank account in euros, then there's no conversions or whatever. So that would be helpful, I'm sure, but too complicated. And at least for like us in our use case, it'll be almost always just one bank account with one currency. So I think just adding the balance transactions would be enough, but it's a pain. I don't want to add another model for the balance transactions because not every other payment processor has those. So that means we got to shove them in like a JSON column. And then that makes querying and doing all that a little bit more of a pain. But in theory, we should be able to group by and sum those the same. But you have to, I think, at least with SQLite and Postgres, the JSON operators with the arrows are the same. I think it was MySQL still a little bit different. Somebody just made another issue about MariaDB on Pay. It doesn't work. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't work because MariaDB says that they are MySQL compatible, but they, for performance, just use text instead of an actual JSON column for their JSON fields. And so you can't use it the way you expect, even though they claim compatibility. But that's what you get. As far as I understand, MariaDB was some investors funded that and we're trying to like IPO the database and whatever. And then Oracle's actually done a good job keeping MySQL competitive and stuff. So there's really no reason to use that. At this point, it seems like MySQL is pretty solid. So I just gave up. I'm not going to bother with trying to deal with that for Pay. We only had 2 people trying to use it. They didn't have good reasons why they were using MariaDB over MySQL anyways. Well, then just use MySQL. It seems to be
write your own gem then, brother. Sorry.
Yeah, make your own database. Just do that.
The one non-awful thing I did this week, or I think I did at the end of last week, was I swapped out Selenium with Playwright. After I went to Justin Searle's talk at Rails World and he briefly mentioned that. Ooh, that sounds interesting. And so I did that.
How did that go? And also, what's the difference for anybody that doesn't know?
So Capybara...
Or do they have to watch Searles' talk?
No, they don't. So under the hood, Capybara uses a library called Selenium to run the tests. There are a few other options other than Selenium. Like, I think Cooperite is another driver.
Playwright, Cooperite.
Yeah, so there's a few different drivers. Playwright is a JavaScript driver, and it is much faster. It seems to be more reliable. Like Justin mentioned in his talk that a lot of the issues you run into with Selenium elements not being there is because it runs faster in, I can't remember if it's either locally or in CI, but it runs faster in one environment. So that's why you get a lot of these timing issues. So what was funny was the only changes I had to make to do this was I had to add the gem for Capybara Playwright, and then I had to add in the driver into our system test helper. And that was essentially it, other than adding a yarn package. And then I bike shedded a little bit, trying to do some magic with bundler hooks, which don't actually exist, to automatically sync the
C code. And
yeah, I wanted like when you ran bundle install and the gem change to automatically install in the compatible yarn package, but I just couldn't make that work automatically. So I did some
that
other
would be
stuff.
cool. I've definitely had that thought in the past too, where it was, if the gem changes, because we have a package JSON that needs to stay in sync, that would be awesome to be able to go update those.
And the gem had a constant inside of it that has the compatible NPM package version in it. So you could use the constant to get the package version to know what you needed, but apparently bundler hooks don't actually exist.
Somebody on Hatchbox, there are such thing as bundler hooks, but it's an extra gem
They're like
or
in
something.
plugins or something. Nick Pezza sent me a link and he's like, you can actually do this. At that point, I was like, I think I just need to like accept that this is more complicated than it needs to be for what I'm trying to do. And I kind of gave up on it, but
Yeah,
there might be something you can do, but my idea was not working. I guess specifically, it doesn't work in the context of how would a Rails initializer know that you've run bundler install too? Because I was like adding this code into an initializer.
So this is what I was thinking of. There's an RVM repository called executable hooks that when you run like a Ruby Gems executable, you can add hooks to it or whatever. And somebody had installed this and it was screwing up their deployments or whatever on Hatchbox. And they didn't even know what this was or why they had it.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that. Even if I did use that, it wouldn't be exactly what I wanted. Like I wanted it that when you ran bundle install in our Rails app that it did that. The connection.
I don't know how that works. Everybody hates the HTTP party hard message post install. And I assume that there's something that prints that out or whatever.
After install message or something.
Almost a post install hook in the gem. It'd actually be cool if the gem itself would check for a package JSON, see if that package was in there and just do it for you or whatever, rather than you having to externally hook into the process and do that or whatever. But it's understandable.
Yeah, I added a little DX niceties on top of it. And I got it so our system test actually upload the failed screenshots, which it had not been doing. But
do you think you could do a Rails initializer that would just check on boot that let me read the package JSON, compare the thing, and if they don't match, at least spit out a, hey, this isn't in sync. Here's a command to fix it.
But that seems like overkill for a testing dependency.
Right. It is.
I could get more and more complicated with this and figure out something. This seems like a little overkill. I added in some code that would automatically, if you ran a command, it would automatically take that compatible version out of the gem and then install it. Like I added a file to do that, and I had a rake task to run that automatically. And then I updated our bin setup so that it would automatically run that. And then we use Danger in CI, which you can write some custom rules and it'll add like a comment, basically run some checks on your CI runs, and added a little rule into it that checked if the gem file.lock, if the Capybara Playwright gem version changed in gem file.lock, it would add like a warning onto the PR that's like, hey, it looks like this gem version changed. Make sure that you run this command to keep the yarn package in sync, which was, I feel like, the best I could do because we have automatic dependency updates. And that was the other thing. I was like, I don't want a developer to like see like, oh, there's an update for this gem and just hit merge and not realize that they might need to update the yarn package as well. Although, again, it's a testing dependency. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, if it was you updated to Rails 8, but you forgot your package JSON, it was referencing Rails 7.2 or whatever. I've done that in the past. That's more problematic and more subtle because things might have changed and it just appears to work until it doesn't in production. So, and hopefully you would test that in CI, but it's also like quite the integration test to do sometimes for active storage or whatever, and not necessarily easy one to catch or test, but might have to try out Playwright. Selenium is definitely, like Justin said, flaky at times. And if you make a pull request to the Rails repository, you'll see that even the Rails core team struggles with flaky tests at that size and stuff. And system tests are quite the pain. So yeah, I'll have to try it out. I like the idea of that. We had the same issues with the TailwindCSS stimulus components library running, I forget what it runs now, but Marco had rewritten the test suite for that, and it was way more reliable than Jest or whatever I had originally. And that's the most critical thing, is stable, consistent tests, but timing and all that is really complex and one of those things.
We'll put a link to it in the show notes, but Justin has a post that literally I followed on how to set it up. I basically followed it up until a point where I veered off and did my own thing, which I just explained on syncing the ARM package. But there was only one test that failed after I made the change. And it was because we were using some private capybara thing to try to refresh the page because of some hacky thing. And I was able to just remove that hacky thing and remove the subsequent sleeps that we had after it. And it just passed.
Nice. That's good. That's when you know you've got a more reliable tool.
I saw one test that flaked once or twice, so there might be something I need to look at. But one thing I do want to try is removing every sleep from every system test we have and seeing how many pass.
Yeah.
It dropped over, I think, 15 to 30 seconds off every system test container because we run them in a matrix, so they're parallelized. So it dropped 15 to 30 seconds off every one of those runs, and it dropped almost 30 seconds from the entire test run.
That's really, really useful stuff. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you do that all the time, it is a lot.
It was not hard to set up.
Yeah, I was reading the post a little bit, and it looks like more or less just kind of swapping out Selenium for Playwright. That's about it.
Yeah.
It's cool. Do you guys use Tailwind at all?
No.
In a similar vein, yesterday and last night, I was working on trying out Tailwind 4 beta 6 or whatever it is now. But yeah, it went from a JavaScript config file that set up a JSON object type thing for extending the colors and whatever else to using CSS for everything. The CSS can still load for backwards compatibility, the JS config file, but you have CSS variables for all the colors and all of that now, which is actually really slick.
It's really nice.
It is way, way cooler than version 3. I'm super excited about it. And there's even teeny tiny things you would never realize was a problem unless he pointed it out. So for gradients, it was using RGB colors we're all used to, but he switched it to using OKLCH or whatever. It was like OKLAB. I don't know much about these color spaces, but apparently there's so many more colors that the gradients are now like super smooth all the way across. And he pointed that out in the video talking about the beta. You know what? I have seen like sort of blocky chunks in the gradients if they're long. And now they're like super smooth, but you can go both ways around the color wheel. It used to always go the shortest path or something. Now you can choose to go the long path around the color wheel if you want. And OKLAB or whatever that he originally had, he had to switch because, of course, Safari 17, if you transition to a transparent color, like blue to transparent, it would go blue to pink instead of transparent, which is super strange. He had to go change that because even though it's 3% usage or something for Safari 17, it's enough that he's got to make sure it's compatible with all that. You can opt into LAB or whatever if you want, but all these cool improvements, it's a massive upgrade. He was even saying that like some of their elements have 4 shadows on them. I just slap shadow or shadow medium or small or whatever on something, and that's it. I don't even think about multiple shadows. And so it apparently supports all these awesome things in version 4. And I was getting pretty hyped about the new cool stuff in there. I went to go like upgrade. You can't apply your own classes anymore. So like added a color called primary. Can't just apply that to stuff. You could use CSS variables instead now, but lots of those little things. And the docs or those sort of blog posts about the new changes doesn't cover all those details, but they do have an upgrade command that did 90% of what I needed, which is great. So it's looking slick. And then Mike D'Alessio's already gotten the script for precompiling the Tailwind CSS executable into the gem and it's all automated. So you can use every single version of the betas already, which is cool, and integrate them with Rails and stuff. It's
Shout out
nice.
Mike.
Yeah, he's doing great work on those gems. So I'm excited about it, but it's still one of those that's, there's still a fair bit of handy work to go do to make it all work, but it's going to be cool to take advantage of all these new things. So,
yeah.
Anyways, man, I got to run.
My Vyvanse is kicking in and I'm starting to think about this form I need to build.
Yeah. And the distractions that you will hit along the way.
Well, I mean, as soon as this call ends, I'm going to stand up and then who knows what's going to happen after that. So
you'll be in some other room all of a sudden. You won't know why. Yeah.
What happened? I feel like I was just hanging out with Chris.
That was weeks ago.
Yeah, so strange. It's like, why is there no food in this house anymore?
All right, man. Well, I will catch you next week.
Yes, sir. Have a good week.
Later.
Peace.